Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Prepping for Everything podcast. I'm Emily, a self-proclaimed prepper, food preservation junkie and homesteader from the Highlands of Scotland, and today we're going to be talking specifically about prepping in an apartment or from a small space. This is one of the biggest reasons that I hear from people all the time as to why they think that they can't prepare or become a little bit more self-reliant or self-sufficient. And I'm here to tell you that that is a false narrative that you are creating in your own head. I know it's hard because typically online we see these preppers and homesteaders and they have so much land, they live in the country, they're homesteading, they're fishing and hunting, and you think as somebody who lives in the city that's never done any of this, that it's not accessible to you. And it is, it's just going to look different. You can prep in an apartment. We now live on 8 acres. We worked really hard to get here, but it wasn't always like that. When we were younger, Will and I don't know how many years ago now, maybe 7 years ago or 8 years ago even, we lived in a small tin bothy. Like, I'm not joking you, this place was around 50 square meters, which is maybe 500 square feet or something like that. I hope that's accurate. I'm not very good with measurements sometimes. And it looked different for us, but it was still possible. We just had to get creative with the space and make it work for us. And you can do that too. So during this podcast, we are going to deep dive into apartment prepping and hopefully give you some tips so that you can get started yourself. Hi listeners, are you ready to take your preparedness to the next level? My comprehensive online course is a great place to start. From food storage and preservation to water readiness and bag-out-bag checklists, I've got you covered. This is more than just presentation screens. I've also added downloadable worksheets, video tutorials, checklists, and loads of prepping content which is consistently being added to as we generate new ideas. Not to mention, you get to take this in your own time to fit around your lifestyle, and you get lifetime access to the content. And here's the best part. As a valued listener of this show, you get an exclusive 10% discount with code POD10. That's POD10 to enter into the coupon code section at checkout. Don't miss out on this opportunity to level up your preparedness game. Visit the link in the show notes to enroll today, and together we can build a future where we are prepared for whatever life throws our way. I'll see you there. The first place that I always recommend people begin, and it's the same if you live in a tiny space or a huge space, and that's clear out and declutter what you already have. Take a day and pick a room or closet to pull everything out and then rearrange again, and I can guarantee you'll have things that you don't need anymore, and it will create more space by just tidying and reorganizing. A lot of the time we just get so stagnant unless you're a minimalist and you're used to doing all of this. But when we recently moved home, I seriously can't believe how much stuff we had that was just sitting there and that I would never have any use for. And maybe it's like this old wartime mentality of, oh no, I'll use that one day or I'll find a use for that. But you're probably not going to because you've forgotten that it's even there. So if you want to keep these things, why not make an inventory? That is a great starting point. So once we've done that, I just want to encourage you to get creative about the space that you're already in. And in a small space, this is a necessity. Where are some places that we don't typically think of for storage? I mean, under your bed, unless it's a really low bed, you've probably got some storage under there. If your bed has enough clearance, you could use totes or vacuum sealed bags to store items, and taking these things out of their original storage boxes can save a ton of space. Just remember that you're still going to label it so you know what it is and what's in there. Number 2, is investing in multi-purpose furniture. If you look for furniture pieces that serve as dual purposes, like a sofa bed or a coffee table with hidden storage underneath, or an ottoman with a removable lid for storage, these are really great places because it's right there, it's in plain sight, but it's not really in plain sight because it doesn't stick out like a sore thumb. Other people aren't going to know that you've got tins and tins and tins of beans in there or whatever you're storing. Another great place, which is pretty standard, is the back of your closet. It's a good place for storing crates of long-term non-perishable food like rice and grains, and it's also a pretty good space to keep more sensitive items like, some spare cash that you just don't want sitting around. Another one that I came across a few months into my preparedness journey is empty suitcases or luggage. I mean, most of us have these floating around in our home and they take up a fair bit of space. And most of the time we're not using them unless we're on vacation or something. So why not put them to good use while you aren't traveling and put some emergency supplies in there instead? And it's a great way to sort of keep everything in one space as well. You could have like a luggage for your water, a luggage for your food, a luggage for, I don't know, your candles or your emergency lighting. Tip number 5 for utilizing your small space would be adding shelving. I know this is a little bit more difficult if you're renting or you don't own your home, but most of the time, if you run it by your landlord, they're not going to be annoyed as long as you don't leave holes everywhere in the walls. So adding shelving can free up a lot of extra space. If you've got some room under the stairs or a place with bare corners, for example, you could add some shelving here to increase the amount that you can store. Piggybacking on that point is stacking vertically. This really makes the most of space that you have to work with, and that just means like working up the way rather than out the way. So if you're stacking boxes, you're saving space by just doing that. So tip number 7, which kind of encompasses all the previous points, is just utilizing unconventional spaces. If you have space above your kitchen cupboards, why not add some beautiful wicker baskets on top of there? It can help hide your preps while also being aesthetically pleasing. I think that's what it always comes down to me. I hate my space being untidy. It just clutters my mind, and it doesn't need to be like that when you're preparing. I think from a lot of these online TV shows, people typically view preppers as hoarders and their house is being totally overrun with boxes and stuff and clutter. And I do not want it to ever be like that. By organizing, it doesn't need to be like that. Another good thing about putting stuff on top of cupboards as well, it's a really good space to store medicine as it's high out of the reach of children. And finally, just keeping an itinerary and organizing is key, because what is the point of having a whole load of food and preps if you never know what you have or where it is when it's needed? And then after that, I just want to encourage you to create some sort of a plan. Prepping is going to look different for everyone, and you want to devise a plan depending on your situation. Will you stay home and shelter in place, or are you going to have to leave in a hurry? Now, of course, this is all dependent on what is going on and what is unfolding, and that will require consistent analysing in itself. But I always like to tackle prudent preparation first. That's sitting down and working through what our most likely to least likely scenarios are. A huge nuclear event, for example, is, well, depending on who you ask, unlikely, and it's not what you're going to encounter every single day. But your car breaking down on a cold winter day is probably highly likely if you live in a cold country. And what we can do to tackle that would just be keeping a bag tucked away in your car with your essentials, like a couple of water bottles, some snacks, a blanket, a small first aid kit, paper towels, a battery bank, some warm clothes, jumper cables, and whatnot. We'll do a full episode on your car kit and preparedness at a future date. But then even going beyond that to everyday scenarios, like, do you have £1,000 or $1,000 of an emergency fund and 3 to 6 months living expenses saved up? Does your vehicle need any major repairs? Do you try and keep your car fuel tank filled up? Do you have any high interest debts? I just think these are all the really practical things to tackle first. And when you tackle these head on and you've cleared that, then we can get into preparing a little bit more and spending more money. And preparedness does not need to be expensive, but looking at this whole topic from a rational and level-headed point of view, these things make sense to tackle first before you move on to anything else. So where would I recommend you go after that? Maybe just going one step further. Do you have a way to cook food if the power goes out? What about staying warm? Have you got food, water, and first aid supplies to see you through whatever situation you're concerned about? Definitely understand that storing water can be tricky in a small space, so having different alternatives to approach this, like purification tablets and drops, or like water filters or rainwater collection on your balcony that could help you out in a pinch, can go a long way. I mean, these will solve 75% of the most common issues that people face, and once you've done all of this, then we can jump more into worrying about long-term prepping. After that, you might want to consider creating a bug out bag or a 72-hour kit, or a go bag as it's commonly referred to. And this is just a bag filled with essentials, things that you would need if you had to evacuate and leave in a hurry. It's already pre-packed, it's in a location that's easy to access, usually close to your door as you're leaving, and it's just got all the goods that are going to see you through the next few days. If you want to know more about bag out bags or 72-hour kits, I have done a full podcast episode on that previously, so if you scroll back, you'll find it there. I like to make this one of the main priorities for people who live in cities or in an apartment, because you might need to evacuate at some point. I just want you to sit down and think about what are the things that you use every day, what keeps you alive, what sustains you, obviously food and water, but what would happen if you fell ill and couldn't leave the house for a week, say? Do you have all the medication and painkillers that you need? Would you have sanitary items on hand? And then, like I said, you do not need to live on acreage to build your skills and to become more self-reliant. You can do that from an apartment. You can read books. You can become more self-sufficient and prepared no matter where you are. And there are so many things that you can do. Bake bread, you can learn to crochet or knit, you can cook your meals from scratch and learn how to actually use the foods that you store. Think about what you'd do in the event that you didn't have access to running water or all of the luxuries that we do today. How would you do things differently? I know gardening can seem so far away in that level of self-sufficiency, but do it on the scale that you can. Do you have a windowsill? Can you put a few pots with a couple of seeds on your windowsill and water it? Start with herbs. Start with what you would use in your dinner, maybe some rosemary or thyme or mint, and take it from there. Then you could work up to some grow bags. You can even, I've seen people with some amazing setups in apartments under like grow lights, and people have just become really smart at making the most with the space that they have. I know not everybody has access to a balcony, but if you do, you've got even more opportunity there. There's someone that I've mentioned previously. He's on Instagram. He's called the Frenchy Gardener, and he teaches people how to grow food from a balcony. It's going to look different, but it's definitely possible. And if you don't have access to any of what I've just mentioned, you probably have a community garden or an allotment or a gardening club somewhere close to you. You know, you could even consider guerrilla gardening. Basically, what guerrilla gardening is the act of gardening and growing foods or plants or flowers on land that you don't actually have legal rights to cultivate, such as abandoned sites or areas that are not being cared for or private property. I don't necessarily advocate doing that, especially on someone's private land, but I personally don't really see the harm if the area is very clearly abandoned and it's overgrown anyway. It's not like you're fly tipping or vandalizing or spray painting the place. You're just growing some food. But that is completely up to your discretion on whether you do that or not. I'm not recommending it. So really, by this point, you're probably here for some practical tips on where to begin. A lot of people like lists. I don't like really giving lists because it's totally dependent, like I mentioned, on your own situation, on how many people are in your family, on where you live in the world, whether it's hot or cold. But if this could help one person, then let's go for it. Everything on this list is not going to apply to everybody. I need to give these disclaimers every time. But what could be helpful for you is about 2 weeks worth of food and water to begin with. That's your baseline. Watch your water consumption when you're being aware of it and calculate it from there. But a rough guide that we need to sustain ourselves is 1 to 2 gallons per person per day of water. And don't forget to include your pets in that. And that obviously covers your cooking and your cleaning and your sanitation and hygiene and, I don't know, gardening and whatever else. Let's go on to toiletries. You want to think about nappies or diapers for my across the pond listeners for at least 2 weeks. Remember, you also have the option of cloth diapers too, but that can become more difficult in a situation that's limited access to water. Medicine of all sorts is really important. Are you stocked up on pain medication or prescription meds, a solid first aid kit, backup glasses or dentures or retainers, disinfectants and bandages and surgical suture kits, including local anaesthetic, A lot of you and me are into homeopathy or natural remedies, but I also would like to keep antibiotics as a backup. There are really good companies, especially in the States, that provide this option, but I'm yet to find one in the UK. So if any of you know of any companies like this that would prescribe antibiotics to keep at home in the event of a real emergency, then hit me up. I don't think it's a thing here, but it's always worth a try. Another thing to keep on hand is cash. Smaller bills too, is if the grid goes down or the electricity is not working, it means that your cards won't work and change will probably be harder to come by. If it's a serious grid down situation and you've managed to figure that out before the rest of the masses have, you've probably got around 24 hours, maybe 48 hours to spend your cash before things get really bad and cash is rendered useless. Again, that is like the worst case grid down situation. What else is a good thing to keep on hand? Trash bags are always good in case the toilets stop working or our infrastructure stops working. They are versatile. They have a lot of uses. You're also going to need somewhere to put all of your rubbish and things can get unsanitary and unhygienic really quickly. They're good things to keep. Some extra candles spread out all over the apartment as decorations is really quite incognito. I love beeswax candles as they're natural and they have no toxic byproducts created when burning, unlike conventional candles. But if you have kids or don't trust yourself around a flame, maybe consider the battery candles or solar charging ones. Several flashlights, really important. Water filters, like I mentioned previously, you're wanting a way to make sure that your water is filtered and clean. You can get the likes of water filter straws so that they're easy to put into your bug out bag for when you're on the go. A camping stove or a wood stove or something you can cook with. A hand cranked radio. These are like the emergency radios that you can just keep winding up. You don't need the power to charge them. An extra power bank is probably pretty important. You can go like really quite big and spend a lot of money on these things. Jackery has a lot of different options. They've got like solar charging power banks as well, or you can just get the wee ones that's going to charge your phone in an emergency situation. Piggybacking off that, it'd be good to keep some spare batteries. A paper map of your city is probably also a good one, and of the surrounding region in case you need to navigate without your phone. And lastly, back to the basics, a fire extinguisher for the house. That's just basic emergency preparedness. This isn't doomsday. This is practical preparedness. I was actually speaking with someone firsthand recently who's from Ukraine, and it was really, really interesting just to hear things from their point of view. I was asking a lot of questions, but what they explained to me was that their town had no supplies coming in and that their biggest issues were medicine, fuel, pet and animal food, diapers, baby formula and wet wipes. Obviously wet wipes for babies, but also for us, because when we're conserving water, we don't want to be taking lavish showers. You're going to be taking Tinker's baths, which is wet wipes under your armpits. Cash. They also said the electricity was gone for several days in some places, but they lived like a mid-sized town that had people who were able to fix the local grid. They also mentioned that a lot of people had their own water well, so it didn't become an issue as everyone kind of came together and used what was available. The lovely part about this conversation, though, is that they said what they found the most important thing was actually a community. And that's what allowed people to survive well, people who came together to help one another out when they can. And that's not to say don't prepare because someone else will do it for you. No, we are all responsible for ourselves and our family, but community is so important. And we all have different skill sets and preps to trade and barter. Okay, I'm going to get ready to wrap this up, but one final note, because a lot of people often ask me for book recommendations. And if you're looking for something non-fiction so gripping that you can't put down, this is not an ad. I know it sounds like an ad because I love these books. The author, Sarah Lyons Fleming, has a series of books. They're called Until the End of the World. It starts with the first book, which is called Until the End of the World. Then There's like a 1.5 small book that's called So Long Lollipops, and that follows one of the main character spin-offs. And although it's a short book, it might be my favourite one. Then book 2 is called And After, and book 3 is All the Stars in the Sky. And I just wish I could go back and read these with fresh eyes because these books kill me. They are amazing. I'll link them in the show notes below for you to check them out. But what I love about this series as well is they keep referring to characters that you haven't met, like brothers and mums and stuff. So what she did was wrote a city series. So that timeline runs alongside the same timeline as until the end of the book, until the end of the world. So once you finish those 4 books, I would recommend going and reading the city series. That's 3 bigger books. And they are just as amazing. They're non-fiction, they're Zompoc, but they have some genuinely great prepping information sprinkled throughout them. And I really enjoyed this city series. It was so different because it's based on being in New York when this major collapse of society happens. But somehow people still made it possible to come together and grow food and raise animals and trade and barter. So when I was thinking about the whole apartment prepping podcast for today, I instantly thought about this city series. I keep things practical preparedness. I don't think that we have a zombie apocalypse coming, but these books are amazing. And I think it gives you some really ingenious ways to prep in an emergency situation, whether it's zombie apocalypse or whether the electricity just goes out. And if you end up reading these and love them, please write me an email at preppingforeverything@gmail.com, as I love having people to fangirl over them with. Thank you so much for listening to another episode. I so appreciate you for sharing this podcast with your friends, for sharing it on Instagram, for tweeting about it, for screenshotting it and taking pictures of where you're listening to it. And I always appreciate you engaging in social media or writing emails. My online panic-free pantry prepping course is available in the show notes below, and you get a discount just for being here and listening to this show. Follow along with all things preparedness, homesteading and general day-to-day life on my Instagram stories, Prepping for Everything, and I'll be back in your ears again next Wednesday. Bye bye.